Ethan Carter was many things: a skilled xenobiologist, a problem solver, and a man who never backed down from a challenge. He had worked with alien species before, studying their biology, learning their ways, and always keeping his cool in dangerous situations. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he would face on Verexon 9. It all started with a strange distress signal, one that had been picked up by a deep space relay station. The message was brief, garbled, and filled with static. No coordinates, no clear indication of what happened. Just one chilling sentence repeated over and over: "They are coming. No one survives." The signal had come from a planet in the farthest reaches of known space, Verexon 9, a world that hadn't been explored for decades. Ethan's mission was clear: investigate the planet, find out what happened to the lost crews, and, if possible, establish first contact with any surviving inhabitants. His shuttle, the Discovery, cruised silently through the dark expanse of space, guided by the faint coordinates buried in the signal. The crew of the ship had long since disbanded, leaving only Ethan on this solo mission. He wasn't exactly thrilled about going alone, but his experience had prepared him for this type of task. Still, there was a certain heaviness in the air as he approached Verexon 9. The silence of space only seemed to amplify his thoughts. When the planet came into view, Ethan couldn't help but notice how eerie it looked. A thick, greenish fog covered much of the surface, and in the distance, tall mountains stretched up into the sky, jagged and unnaturally sharp. There were no signs of civilization, no cities or even simple structures, just the wilderness. Ethan landed the shuttle at the edge of a dense jungle, the same place where the last team had sent their final message before they vanished. He gathered his equipment, his communication devices, research tools, and survival gear, and prepared to step out into the unknown. As he opened the shuttle's hatch, a gust of warm, humid air hit him, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and something more: pungent. He had read the reports about the Xalvira, the alien species that supposedly inhabited this planet. The tribe was known for its fierce reputation, warrior-like females who had been rumored to hunt anything that entered their territory. Yet, no one had ever truly learned about them. The species was shrouded in mystery, with only the vaguest reports of their behavior. From the limited information Ethan had, he knew one thing for sure: they didn't welcome strangers. With a deep breath, he set out toward the jungle, the sound of his boots crunching on the undergrowth breaking the eerie stillness. His first task was to locate the camp of the missing expedition. They had been conducting research on the native wildlife, but their communication had cut off unexpectedly. The Xalvira were most likely involved, but what had happened to the crew? The further Ethan traveled into the jungle, the thicker the air became. The dense trees seemed to close in around him, and shadows stretched long and dark, hiding whatever creatures might be lurking. He checked his scanner, which displayed nothing unusual, just the typical readings of flora and fauna. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. After hours of trekking through the thick jungle, he stumbled upon the first sign of the missing team: a damaged communication relay, its surface scratched and dented, lying discarded on the ground. Ethan knelt beside it, running his fingers over the cold metal. Whoever had left it behind hadn't been in a hurry. They'd been dragged away. His mind raced with possibilities. What could have caused this? Just as he was about to examine the device further, a noise broke the silence: an unnatural rustle in the trees, followed by a series of quick, sharp footsteps. He whipped around, his heart pounding. The jungle was alive with movement now, though it wasn't the wind. Something was out there. Before he could react, a group of figures emerged from the undergrowth. They were tall, with slender but muscular bodies, their skin a deep shade of purple, and their eyes gleamed with an otherworldly intensity. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. The Xalvira were real, and they were standing right in front of him. The leader of the group, a fierce-looking female with a scar running down her cheek, stepped forward. She was taller than any human, her long black hair tied back in a braid, and she wore armor made of an unknown material. Her gaze locked onto Ethan, cold and calculating. The others moved silently behind her, waiting for her orders. Ethan's mind raced. He had to think fast. These aliens were known to be hostile, but he didn't want to provoke them. His first instinct was to remain calm, speak respectfully, and hope that reason would win the day. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to learn. "I come in peace," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. The scared leader's lips curled into a faint smile. "Many have come in peace," she said in a language that sounded like a blend of growls and clicks. Her words weren't clear, but the meaning was unmistakable. "None have left alive." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The leader of the Zalvera stared at Ethan with cold, calculating eyes, and for a moment, the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. The other warriors, silent as shadows, stood perfectly still behind her, waiting for some signal. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, thick as the jungle fog around him. He had no weapons, no backup, and no idea what they wanted. All he had was his knowledge and his ability to stay calm under pressure. "I'm not here to fight," Ethan said again, his voice clear and steady. He slowly reached into his bag, pulling out a small device, his translator. "I want to understand." The scared leader, still watching him with suspicion, tilted her head slightly. She stepped forward, her gaze flicking over Ethan's equipment. The other Exalvera warriors tensed, ready for any sudden move. The leader's sharp eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. Instead, she motioned to two of her companions, who moved swiftly to Ethan's sides, grabbing his arms in a firm, unyielding grip. Ethan's heart raced, but he didn't struggle. He knew better than to resist now. The moment he showed fear or aggression, it would only make things worse. They were stronger, faster, and much more dangerous than any human he had ever encountered. "Where are you taking me?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone even. The leader didn't answer. Instead, she motioned for the others to move, and they began walking, forcing Ethan to follow. The jungle seemed to close in around him as they led him deeper into the forest, the dense trees blocking out the sunlight. The air grew heavier with each step, and the sounds of the jungle became muffled, as if the entire world was holding its breath. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a large clearing. In the center stood a massive structure, an ancient, stone-like building, half hidden by vines and overgrowth. The design was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, glowing light. This was no ordinary building. It looked like something built by a civilization long forgotten. The Elvira leader stopped at the entrance, gesturing for Ethan to enter. The two warriors holding him pushed him forward, and Ethan stepped into the shadow of the structure. Inside, the air was cool and still. The floor was smooth and lined with more glowing symbols. At the far end of the room stood a large stone throne, where the leader now took her seat. She didn't speak immediately, just watched Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. For a moment, the silence stretched between them. Ethan remained standing, waiting for something, anything, that might help him understand what was going on. Finally, the leader spoke, her voice low and gravelly. "You speak of peace, human, but peace is not what we seek. The world you have come to is a place of survival. There is no room for weakness here." Ethan's mind raced, trying to make sense of her words. Survival. He had read about the Zalvira tribe before, how they had survived without males for generations, using their advanced cloning technology. But that didn't explain the hostility. Why were they so aggressive toward outsiders? "You don't want to fight," the leader continued, her voice sharper now. "Then prove it." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Prove it. How could he prove that he didn't want to fight when he was surrounded by armed warriors in their own stronghold? "I'm not here to prove anything to you," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice calm, but it came out more forcefully than he intended. I'm here to help. If you want peace, you need to understand that not all humans are your enemies." The leader's eyes flashed with something like amusement. "You think you can teach us peace, human? You are nothing like us. You have no idea what it means to fight for survival." Ethan didn't know what to say. What could he possibly say to change her mind? The tension in the room was thick, and he could feel the weight of their gazes on him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, a loud crash echoed from outside. The ground trembled slightly beneath his feet. The Exalvira leader stood instantly, her eyes narrowing. She raised her hand, signaling for the warriors to stand ready. The room filled with the sound of hurried footsteps as the warriors gathered their weapons. The leader's eyes locked onto Ethan. "You stay here," she ordered. "If you value your life, do not move." Before Ethan could respond, the leader and her warriors stormed out of the building. He could hear the sounds of battle, shouting, the clash of metal, and strange alien noises, but he had no idea what was happening. It was chaos, a loud, chaotic mess outside the structure. Ethan stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Should he run? Should he try to help? He didn't have much of a choice. He was alone, trapped in a foreign land, surrounded by a species that didn't trust him and likely thought of him as an enemy. But still, a part of him knew he couldn't give up. If he was going to survive here, he needed to figure out who the real enemy was and how he could make sure he wasn't part of it. Ethan stood frozen in the stone chamber, his thoughts racing. The Exalvira warriors had rushed outside, leaving him alone in the silence. The sounds of battle echoed through the walls, a chaotic mix of alien voices and the crash of weapons. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing. The Exalvira weren't the only danger here. The leader, Vaishera, had made it clear. If he wanted to survive, he had to prove his worth. But how? What did they want from him? And who were they fighting? A loud crackle from the communicator on his wrist broke his thoughts. Ethan quickly grabbed it, but the signal was too weak. He couldn't get through to his shuttle, and there was no telling how long he'd be stuck on this strange world. But he had no choice but to wait. He'd have to learn more about the Exalvira, understand their ways, and find a way to earn their trust. A few hours later, Vaishera and her warriors returned, looking tired but triumphant. Their battle had ended, and they had defeated whatever threat had attacked them. But Vaishera was different now. There was something in her eyes, a new respect for Ethan, perhaps. "You've seen what we face," she said, her voice still as sharp as ever. "But there are greater trials ahead. If you truly wish to survive, you must prove yourself." Ethan nodded, unsure of what to expect. What kind of trials? Vaishera smiled, a cruel twist of her lips. "The trials of the Ravenous. You will face tests of your body and mind, and only if you succeed will you be allowed to live. Fail, and you will be discarded like the others before you." Ethan didn't hesitate. He had no other choice. "I accept." The first trial came the very next morning. Vaishera led him into a vast arena surrounded by high stone walls, a place where the Exalvira tribe had conducted their challenges for generations. Ethan could see the other warriors watching from above, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. At the center of the arena stood a massive stone platform, and around it, strange alien creatures were chained. Some looked like oversized lizards, others like flying predators with sharp claws and teeth. These were the beasts of the jungle, and they had been captured for the trial. Vaishera raised her hand, signaling for the first beast to be released. It was a large, scaly creature with massive jaws and a vicious snarl. It had the strength to tear through steel, and it was hungry. As the creature charged at Ethan, he knew he had to think fast. The Exalvira weren't here to help. They wanted to see if he could survive on his own. The beast lunged at him, but Ethan ducked, narrowly avoiding the snapping jaws. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no way he could fight this creature head-on, but he didn't need to. He needed to outsmart it. Ethan ran toward the edge of the arena, using the walls to his advantage. The beast followed, but as it reached the corner, Ethan leaped onto a nearby rock formation, narrowly avoiding the creature's attack. From there, he reached for a rope that had been left on a nearby structure, part of the trial setup. The rope was sturdy, and he quickly swung down onto the other side of the arena, catching the beast off guard. The creature, disoriented for a moment, turned to chase him again. But by now, Ethan had spotted a weakness, a set of chains hanging from the arena ceiling. He quickly climbed up and used the chains to his advantage, evading the beast's attacks while slowly leading it toward a large pit at the center of the arena. When the creature charged once more, Ethan jumped to the side, and the beast fell straight into the pit. The audience above let out a loud cheer, impressed by his quick thinking. Shara watched him carefully, her face betraying no emotion, but Ethan could tell that she was beginning to respect him. He had passed the first trial, but there were many more to come. The second trial was less about strength and more about intellect. Shara led him to a chamber filled with strange, alien puzzles. The walls were lined with intricate symbols and mechanisms that seemed impossible to understand. The challenge was simple: solve the puzzle, and the door would open. Fail, and the walls would close in, trapping him inside. Ethan stared at the puzzle in front of him, feeling a rush of frustration. The symbols seemed to shift before his eyes, rearranging themselves. He recognized some of the patterns, but others were completely alien. The clock was ticking. He had no time to waste. Using his knowledge of language and patterns, Ethan began to connect the symbols. He tested each possibility, carefully deciphering the hidden meaning behind the alien designs. Slowly, the puzzle began to shift into place, each piece falling into place like a well-oiled machine. With a final click, the door to the chamber swung open. Ethan let out a breath of relief. He had passed the second trial. Shara, watching from the doorway, seemed impressed. "You are not like the others," she said. "You are clever, resourceful, but there are many more trials to come." Ethan didn't know what awaited him, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stop now. The Scifi might be fierce and unforgiving, but he had come this far, and he wasn't going to let them break him. Ethan woke up early the next day, his body sore from the previous day's trials. The excitement of having survived the beast and the puzzle faded quickly as reality set in. He still had more tests to face. He had to prove himself worthy to the Scifi, or they would discard him like they had done with the others. But so far, he had succeeded. He had outsmarted the creature in the arena and solved the puzzle that none before him had been able to. But there was a deeper feeling stirring in his chest, one that gnawed at him as he followed Shara to the next challenge. Was this truly about survival, or was there something more? As he walked through the jungle, he glanced around, noticing the distant gazes of the Scifi warriors who stood watch. They weren't watching just him. They were watching to see how far he would go. And for the first time since landing on Varexon 9, Ethan wondered what would happen if he truly won their respect. Shara led him to a clearing surrounded by dense trees. In the center of the clearing was a massive stone altar, and around it, several warriors stood ready. This was where the next trial would begin. The air around him seemed to thrum with an energy he couldn't understand. He had heard of these trials from the other explorers, but witnessing them firsthand was different. The atmosphere was oppressive, full of silent tension. "This is the trial of the mind," Shara announced as she stopped at the altar. "You will face not only physical challenges but tests of your spirit. Some will try to break you. Others will push you to your limit. Only those who endure can leave this place alive." Ethan's stomach tightened. He had expected something like this, but hearing the words aloud made it real. He wasn't just fighting against wild creatures or solving alien puzzles. He was about to face something far more dangerous, something that could break him mentally. A few of the warriors stepped forward, holding strange, glowing objects in their hands. They were crystal-like, glowing softly in the dim light. One of them, a tall female with short silver hair, approached Ethan, holding the crystal toward his chest. Without a word, she pressed it against his skin, and immediately his mind was flooded with visions. Suddenly, Ethan found himself standing in the middle of a vast desert, the sun burning down on him. Around him were the shadows of other explorers, human and alien, screaming, fighting, and dying. He could hear their cries in his mind, feel the hopelessness and fear that threatened to overwhelm him. The heat was unbearable, and his body felt as if it was suffocating. He stumbled forward, but each step seemed to pull him deeper into despair. The vision shifted, and Ethan was underwater, gasping for breath as strange, massive creatures circled him. The pressure of the deep sea was crushing, and he could feel himself drowning, his lungs burning. His mind screamed for air, but there was nothing but darkness. Then the vision changed again, and Ethan was back on Varexon 9. But this time, he was surrounded by Xalvira warriors, all closing in on him. Their eyes glowed with cold malice, and their weapons were drawn, ready for battle. They were going to kill him. He could see it in their eyes. Ethan felt his heart race as the fear rose within him. It felt real. So real that he could barely tell the difference between the visions and reality. His breath grew shallow, and his body trembled. But deep down, he knew that he had to push through. He had faced real dangers before, but this was something different. This was not just a test of strength, but of his mind, his very spirit. He remembered the words of his mentor from years ago. The mind is your greatest weapon. If you can control it, you can control anything. Taking a deep breath, Ethan focused. He closed his eyes within the vision, blocking out the noise, the fear, and the pain. He remembered who he was. He was Ethan Carter, a survivor, a thinker. He had beaten the odds before, and he wouldn't let his mind break now. Gradually, the vision started to fade. The desert disappeared, the ocean retreated, and the warriors melted into nothing. The pressure in his chest lifted, and he could breathe again. When he opened his eyes, he found himself back in the clearing with Vaishira, who was watching him intently. The warriors who had surrounded him now stood at a distance, their faces unreadable. "You have passed the trial of the mind," Vaishira said, her voice low. "Few ever do. Most succumb to the visions, trapped in their own fears. But you," she looked him up and down, "you are different. You do not break easily." Ethan stood, his legs shaky, but his mind clearer than ever. He had passed, but the trial had left its mark. He had faced his deepest fears, and though it had been brutal, he had overcome it. But there was no time to rest. The final trial was yet to come, and Vaishira's eyes told him it would be the hardest one yet. "You have shown great strength," she said, her voice colder now. "But the final test will decide if you are worthy of living among us. It is not just your survival that matters here, but your place among the Xalvira." Ethan didn't need to ask what that meant. He could see it in her eyes. The final trial was not only about survival, it was about understanding the Xalvira and proving he could live with them. The challenge wasn't over yet, and the hardest part was still ahead. Ethan felt the weight of Vaishira's words pressing down on him. The final trial was not just about his survival, it was about his place among the Xalvira. He had come a long way, surviving beasts, solving puzzles, and facing his deepest fears. But he knew this last test would be different. The Xalvira didn't just want a survivor, they wanted someone who could prove that they belonged. As Vaishira led him deeper into the jungle, the air grew thicker with the smell of damp earth and the sound of distant animal calls. The path they followed was narrow, and the trees loomed above them, their branches twisting like dark fingers. Ethan's senses were on high alert, but this time there was no sound of battle. No creatures or traps, just silence. After what felt like hours of walking, they arrived at a massive ancient temple. It stood at the heart of the jungle, its walls covered in thick vines and roots. The structure was almost completely hidden, as if nature had slowly reclaimed it. But Ethan could see the faint glow of energy pulsing through the stone. It was clear that the Xalvira had been here for a long time, and this place was sacred to them. Vaishera turned to him, her expression serious. "This is the Temple of the Ravenous," she said quietly. "It is where we determine who is worthy to live among us. The trial here is unlike any other you have faced." Ethan nodded, trying to steady his breathing. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. Would he be cast out, or would he be accepted by the Xalvira? The air around him seemed to hum with energy, and his heart beat louder in his chest. Vaishera stepped forward and placed her hand on the stone door, which seemed to respond to her touch. Slowly, the door opened, revealing a dark, shadowy interior. Without a word, she motioned for Ethan to follow. He hesitated for a moment before stepping into the temple. The inside of the temple was vast, with towering pillars that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. The floor was covered in a strange, glowing pattern, and in the center of the room was a raised platform. On it stood a large stone altar, surrounded by more of the glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the atmosphere felt heavy, almost oppressive. Vaishera stood to the side, watching Ethan closely. "This is where you will face your final test. The trial of the Ravenous is a test of your will, your spirit, and your strength. You will be given a choice that will decide your fate." Ethan looked around, confused. What kind of choice could it be? And what was the meaning of this trial of the Ravenous? Before he could ask, the ground beneath him began to tremble. The air grew colder, and the temperature dropped rapidly. A low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows, and suddenly, the floor shifted. Ethan's eyes widened as the ground opened up before him, revealing a massive pit. From the depths of the pit, enormous creatures began to emerge, creatures that were nothing like the beasts he had fought before. These were huge, ravenous beasts, their eyes glowing with hunger and ferocity. They moved with lightning speed, their sharp teeth bared, and their claws ready to tear through anything in their path. Vaishera's voice broke through the chaos. "You have two choices. You can fight these creatures, using your strength and your wits to survive. Or you can choose to face the darkness of the pit. The darkness will test your resolve, your fear, and your courage. If you survive, you will be worthy to join us." Ethan's mind raced. He could see the creatures closing in, their massive forms moving with terrifying speed. The pit, however, was a mystery. Would it be a test of his fear? Would he be able to survive whatever lay in the darkness? The creatures roared, and the ground shook beneath Ethan's feet. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew he had to make a decision. He couldn't back down now. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to give up. He stepped back, glancing at the dark pit. The creatures were getting closer, their snarls filling the air. He had no choice. He had to choose the darkness. The creatures were too powerful, and he didn't stand a chance in an open fight. Without hesitation, Ethan turned and leaped into the pit, the shadows swallowing him whole. As he fell, he felt the air rush past him, the cold enveloping him. The roar of the beasts faded, replaced by a deafening silence. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, and he had no idea what awaited him at the bottom. Suddenly, his fall stopped. He landed on solid ground, but the darkness around him was impenetrable. He couldn't see a thing. He could barely hear anything except his own breathing, slow and steady. Then a voice echoed in his mind. "You are not alone here, Ethan Carter." The voice was familiar, yet strange. It felt ancient, almost like it came from the very heart of the planet itself. Ethan's heart raced, but he stood tall, determined to face whatever was ahead. Only those who are truly worthy can endure the darkness. Will you survive? Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. This was the final challenge. The darkness wasn't just a physical test. It was a test of his soul, of his very will to survive. Ethan's heart pounded in the oppressive darkness that surrounded him. His breath echoed in the empty space, but all else was silent. The voice that had spoken to him was gone, leaving him with only his thoughts. He was alone in this cold, black void. But something about the darkness felt different. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was as though the very air itself was watching, waiting for him to make a move. He could feel his pulse in his ears, the rhythm steady but quick, as though it, too, was testing him. But there was no way back. The creatures were a memory now, their growls replaced by the haunting silence of the pit. It was only him and the darkness. The creatures, the choices, and the trials had led him here. And now, the only thing that mattered was surviving this final test. Ethan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had survived so much already, had outsmarted beasts, solved puzzles, faced his deepest fears. But this was something deeper. This was not a test of physical strength, nor was it a test of intellect. This was something different. It was a test of his soul. The silence stretched on, a heavy blanket over his thoughts. He had to stay calm. Panic would be his enemy. Ethan reminded himself of the lessons he had learned, both from his training and from his own experience. When everything around you falls apart, you hold on to what you know is true. For Ethan, that was his determination to survive, to keep pushing forward no matter what. Suddenly, the air shifted. Ethan felt a change, a faint breeze where none had been before. It was subtle, but it stirred something inside him. He opened his eyes and squinted into the darkness, but still saw nothing. Yet he knew something was happening. The void had not claimed him. It was waiting for him to move, to make a choice. He stepped forward, each footfall soft and hesitant. The ground beneath him felt solid, but there was an odd sensation of the world shifting. The pit, the darkness, none of it felt like it was real. It was as though he was in a space between worlds, a place where only his will could guide him. As he walked, a distant light appeared in the farthest corner of his vision. It was small at first, like the faint glow of a star in a dark sky. But it grew brighter as he moved toward it, its warmth pulling him in. With each step, the light grew, pushing back the darkness and revealing a small circle of space around him. But as Ethan got closer, the light revealed something unexpected. A figure stood in the center of the light, a figure he instantly recognized. It was himself, but this version of him was different. His clothes were torn and weathered, his face worn with exhaustion. His eyes, once filled with hope and determination, were now clouded with doubt. The figure stood there, staring at him silently, as if waiting for something. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. The air seemed to thicken, and the space around him felt colder. What is this?" he whispered, taking a cautious step back. The figure spoke, its voice familiar yet distant. "This is your trial, Ethan Carter. You have come so far, but now you must face the hardest part of all, yourself." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just a test of his survival. It was a test of his mind, his beliefs, and his very essence. The figure in front of him was a mirror of everything he feared, everything he had struggled with. It was a manifestation of his own self-doubt. "You think you are strong, but what is strength without purpose?" the figure asked, its voice calm but piercing. "You've fought for your survival, but have you fought for what you believe in? Have you ever stopped to question if you deserve to be here?" Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The questions hit too close to home. He had spent so much of his life fighting, surviving, and pushing forward without ever truly stopping to ask why. He had always thought survival was the only thing that mattered. But now, in the presence of this twisted version of himself, he wasn't so sure anymore. The figure continued, "You fear failure. You fear what will happen if you let go. But in your fear, you fail to see what truly matters. Your purpose has always been in front of you, but you've been too blind to see it." Ethan felt a rush of conflicting emotions: anger, frustration, confusion. He had worked so hard, had endured so much. But this creature, this reflection of his deepest fears, was right. He had never truly stopped to think about what came after the trials, what came after survival. The figure's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, Ethan saw a flicker of something. Something human, something familiar. His own reflection. "You are not alone, Ethan," the figure said softly. "You are stronger than you think, but you must let go of your fear. You must believe that you are worthy." The words sank in. They stirred something deep within him. His survival had always been about one thing: proving himself. But now he understood. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about becoming something more. It was about accepting himself for who he truly was, without the fear, without the doubt. With a deep breath, Ethan stepped forward, toward the figure. And as he did, the figure faded, dissolving into the light. The darkness that had once enveloped him began to recede, replaced by the warmth of the light. Ethan stood alone in the bright space, his heart steady. He had faced the hardest part of the trial, his own inner demons, and he had won. The light that had enveloped Ethan began to fade, and the silence that had once consumed him now felt distant. His heart was steady, his mind clear. For the first time, he truly understood what he had to do. He had not just passed the test. He had come to realize something deeper about himself. It was not survival that defined him, but purpose. As the darkness receded and the light grew brighter, Ethan felt a strange warmth surrounding him. The voice from before, the one that had guided him through the trial, returned once more, its tone softer, yet filled with power. "You have faced your fears, Ethan Carter. You have proven your strength, your will, and your purpose. Now the final decision is in your hands." The ground beneath his feet trembled as the voice echoed through the space. The pit, the darkness, the trial, it was all gone now. Ethan found himself standing once again in the center of the temple, but this time everything was different. The walls of the temple glowed with an ethereal light, and the air was filled with an energy that was almost tangible. Shera appeared before him, her eyes filled with a quiet respect. "You have passed," she said, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. "The darkness, the creatures, the trial of the mind. It was all to test you. But now you must decide. Will you stay or will you leave?" Ethan's thoughts raced. He had faced countless challenges, survived battles, and solved impossible puzzles. But this was different. The Xalvara were a tribe that valued strength, intelligence, and resilience, but they also valued unity, purpose, and the ability to overcome one's own doubts. He had passed all their tests, but now he had to decide if he truly belonged. "I fought for survival," Ethan said slowly, his voice firm. "But I've also learned that survival isn't everything. It's about what you stand for, about what you choose to do with your life." Shera nodded, her expression unreadable. "And what is it that you stand for, Ethan Carter? What is your purpose here among the Xalvara?" Ethan paused, the weight of her words settling over him. He thought about all he had endured, his journey, his fears, and his growth. It wasn't just about being strong or surviving anymore. It was about making a choice to live with meaning. "I stand for proving that humans can be more than just survivors," Ethan said, his voice growing stronger. "I stand for showing that we can be part of something greater, that we can work together, learn, and grow. I choose to be a part of this tribe, not as an outsider, but as someone who believes in what you stand for." Shera regarded him carefully, her sharp eyes searching for any hint of hesitation. After a long moment, she nodded. "Your words are true. You have proven yourself, Ethan Carter, not just in strength, but in heart. You have passed every trial, faced every challenge. And now you have shown us that you understand the true meaning of survival." The ground beneath Ethan's feet began to vibrate as the walls of the temple shifted. The ancient stones moved, and the air filled with a low hum. A new path opened before him, leading deeper into the heart of the temple. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening. You are no longer a mere outsider, Shara continued. You are one of us, if you choose to accept it. Ethan looked down at the ground, the weight of her words sinking in. He had come so far. He had survived the trials, conquered his fears, and learned more about himself than he ever thought possible. But now, this was the moment of truth. This was his choice. He looked up at Shara and smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. I accept. At that moment, the temple came alive. The walls pulsed with energy, and the air around him seemed to shimmer. The Exalvira warriors who had watched his every move now stepped forward, their faces showing a mix of respect and acceptance. They circled around him, their eyes locked onto his with a new understanding. Shara stepped aside, revealing a stone pedestal at the center of the room. On it, a shining crystal sat, its surface glowing with a soft, radiant light. She motioned toward it. This is the heart of our tribe. To accept your place among us, you must take this crystal. It symbolizes your commitment to the Exalvira and to your new purpose. Ethan walked toward the pedestal, his step steady. He reached out and took the crystal in his hand. The moment his fingers touched its surface, a surge of energy filled him, and he felt a connection to the Exalvira, unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as though the very essence of the tribe had flowed into him, and he knew in that instant that he had found his place. The warriors around him nodded in approval. Shara stepped forward, her gaze proud and strong. You are one of us now, Ethan Carter. You have earned your place. Ethan stood tall, the crystal in his hand glowing brightly. He felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had led him here, to a new life, a new tribe, and a future that was full of possibilities. The trials were over. And now, Ethan had a new path to walk, not as a survivor, but as a member of the Exalvira.